Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you will shatter everything you think you know about power, authority, and the most dangerous weapon in the universe. Hit that like button right now, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why 3 galactic empires simultaneously surrendered to a human prisoner who had been locked in solitary confinement for 7 years. And trust me when I say the single word that brought them to their knees is something you use every day without realizing its terrifying power. The emergency klaxon screaming through the Galactic News Network's headquarters had only sounded twice in recorded history, once when the Void Hunters returned from dark space, and once when reality itself had temporarily ceased functioning in the Andromeda sector. Today marked the 3rd time, and the reason was so impossible that the crystalline news anchor's form was literally flickering with disbelief. Breaking news that defies all political analysis. The entity broadcast across 17 billion communication networks, its harmonics cracking with the strain of processing impossible data. In coordinated announcements issued within the past hour, 3 galactic superpowers have declared unconditional surrender. The holographic displays behind the anchor showed images that would be studied by historians for millennia, the blood-red battle standards of the Kethlar Dominion being lowered in defeat, the golden corporate towers of the Zephyrian hegemony broadcasting surrender codes, and the perfect geometric symbols of the Crystalline Confederacy transmitting submission protocols. These are not military defeats. No battles were fought. No weapons were fired. No invasions occurred. The anchor's form stabilized as it delivered the most bewildering piece of information in galactic history. All 3 empires cite the same authority for their surrender: a single human prisoner named Marcus Chin, currently serving a life sentence in solitary confinement on the maximum security asteroid Tartarus 7. The prisoner identification hologram that appeared showed an unremarkable middle-aged human with graying hair and calm eyes, a being so ordinary that he could have been anyone's neighbor, anyone's friend, anyone's forgotten relative. Marcus Chin has had no communication with the outside galaxy for 7 years. No access to technology, no contact with political leaders, no means of coercion or threat. Yet within 47 minutes of receiving what prison logs describe as brief personal messages from this human, each empire began dismantling military installations that had stood for millennia. The silence that followed carried a question that would echo across the stars. What could possibly be so powerful that it convinced 3 galactic superpowers to kneel before a human they had never met? The courtroom had been packed with the highest-ranking military officials in human history, all there to witness the trial of the man who had become too dangerous for his own species to control. Dr. Marcus Chin. General Patricia Morrison read from charges that still made veteran officers uncomfortable. You stand accused of developing psychological warfare techniques so effective that their continued use poses a threat to the stability of civilized society. Chin stood at the defendant's podium wearing a prisoner's uniform instead of the dress blues he had earned through 15 years of military service. His crime wasn't murder, treason, or espionage. It was being too good at ending wars without firing a shot. Your Honor, his defense attorney said, her voice carrying the weight of someone defending the indefensible. My client's methods have prevented more deaths than any weapon in human arsenal. He converts enemies into allies through conversation. That's the problem, General Morrison replied with grim finality. The evidence that followed painted a picture that chilled everyone present. Chin hadn't just developed new tactics, he had weaponized human empathy itself. The first recording showed Chin during the Proxima Crisis, sitting across from a Kethlar commander whose species had evolved for nothing but warfare. The alien's chitinous armor bore the trophies of a dozen conquered worlds, his 4 arms carried weapons that could level cities, and his compound eyes held the cold confidence of a being who had never known defeat. Until Chin asked him a question. Commander Thrakval, tell me about the first innocent you killed. The change was instant and horrifying to watch. The unstoppable alien warrior, a creature whose people celebrated death and battle as the highest honor, suddenly looked lost, confused, almost human. That is not relevant to military negotiations. Isn't it? You're asking my species to surrender to your authority. I'd like to understand what that authority is built on. When you killed that first civilian, was it necessary? Or was it convenient? What followed was 47 minutes of the most devastating conversation in recorded military history. Chen didn't threaten, didn't manipulate, didn't coerce. He simply asked questions that forced the alien commander to examine his own actions, his own motivations, his own conscience. By the end of the recording, the Kethlar commander was weeping, a biological response his species wasn't supposed to possess. The defendant, testified Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the Military Ethics Board, has achieved a 97% success rate in converting hostile forces to Allied positions through conversation alone. Enemy commanders exposed to his techniques consistently experience what we term moral clarity events, sudden recognition of ethical contradictions that result in fundamental worldview changes. The prosecution argued that Chin had crossed the line from warfare into something more dangerous: the systematic deconstruction of the psychological foundations that allowed beings to commit violence in service of authority. Your Honors, Chin said in his final statement, I developed a method for ending wars by helping people remember what they already knew but had trained themselves to forget: that every person they kill is someone's child, parent, friend, or lover. My crime was making enemies human to each other. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of psychological warfare that exceeded acceptable military parameters. The sentence was life imprisonment with communication restrictions to prevent the spread of techniques deemed dangerous to galactic stability. Chin accepted without appeal, making only one request: solitary confinement to ensure his methods couldn't accidentally spread to other prisoners. Warden Korvex of Tartarus 7 had written in his initial assessment: subject demonstrates no resistance to incarceration and appears to view imprisonment as an acceptable outcome. Most concerning, subject treats every interaction as an opportunity to practice his techniques. Recommend minimal contact with all personnel. For 7 years, that recommendation had been followed religiously. Until yesterday, when Marcus Chin had asked to send 3 messages. High General Thraxel of the Kethlar Dominion had conquered 40 worlds, commanded armies of millions, and earned personal honor through 8 centuries of uninterrupted military victory. His armor was forged from the bones of defeated enemies, his weapons had drunk the blood of 1,000 species, and his name was whispered in terror across half the galaxy. Yet, as he stood in the visitor processing center of Tartarus 7, submitting to security procedures like a common civilian, he felt smaller than he ever had in his 9 centuries of existence. The irony was not lost on him. 24 hours earlier, he had commanded the largest military force in galactic history. Now he was voluntarily submitting to restraints and weapons scans so he could beg for an audience with a human prisoner. High General, Warden Korvex said carefully, I must ask again, are you certain you want to proceed? The prisoner's psychological techniques are classified as potentially harmful to mental stability. Thraxel's mandibles clicked with something that might have been bitter laughter. Warden, 2 days ago I received a message consisting of a single word repeated 3 times. That message convinced me to disband the most powerful military force in the galaxy and convert our weapons facilities to hospitals. I need to understand what that word has done to me. And if exposure to the prisoner causes further psychological changes? Then I will learn whether those changes serve justice or serve my own convenience. The maximum security interview chamber had been designed to contain telepaths, reality manipulators, and beings who could kill with a thought. Yet as Thraxel was escorted into the sterile room, he knew that none of these precautions would protect him from simple conversation. Marcus Chin sat across from him wearing standard prison clothing that made him appear almost comically small compared to the 9-foot-tall Kethlar general. Yet his eyes held the calm confidence of someone who understood exactly why this meeting was necessary. High General Thraxel, Chin said, his voice carrying through the communications system with perfect clarity. Thank you for coming. Though I suspect you know this conversation was inevitable. You sent me a single word. It has haunted me for 48 hours. What word was that? Why? Repeated 3 times. Why? 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 Chin leaned forward slightly. And you found yourself unable to answer. I found myself questioning everything I had spent 9 centuries accepting without examination. Tell me what you discovered. Thraxol's compound eyes met Chen's with an intensity that seemed to burn through layers of conditioning and cultural programming. I discovered that I could not answer the simplest question about my own existence. Why do I rule? Why do I conquer? Why do I kill? For 900 years I never asked myself these questions because I was afraid of what the answers might reveal. And now I understand that my entire civilization is built on a foundation I cannot justify. Every world we conquered because we could. Every species we subjugated because it was convenient. Every being I killed because ending life was easier than finding alternatives. Chen's expression carried something that looked like compassion mixed with inevitability. What will you do with that understanding? I have already begun. Our military installations are being converted to medical research facilities. Our weapons manufacturers are being asked to produce humanitarian aid. Our conquered territories are being granted immediate independence. And if your people resist these changes? Thraxol straightened, his massive frame taking on a dignity it had never possessed when armored for war. Then I will ask them the same question you asked me. I will keep asking until they find an answer that allows them to sleep peacefully, or until they choose to step aside for leaders who can. As the interview concluded, Chen made one final observation. Hi General, you asked me why I sent that message. The answer is simple, because you were ready to hear the question. Some truths can only be received when the listener has the courage to face them. Watching the recordings later, Warden Corvex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the asteroid's environmental systems. The human had accomplished in 30 minutes what diplomatic missions had failed to achieve over centuries: the complete philosophical transformation of a military empire. But what terrified Corvex most was the realization that Chen had used no coercion, no manipulation, no advanced psychology. He had simply asked a question that forced his visitor to examine the moral implications of his own power. And if such a simple question could topple a galactic empire? Corvex made a mental note to avoid private conversations with the prisoner. Some questions were too dangerous to hear. Corporate Executive Prime Zexmiron arrived at Tartarus 7 like he was attending the most important board meeting in galactic history, which, in a way, he was. His entourage included legal advisors, financial analysts, security consultants, and psychological counselors, all assembled to treat this meeting as a hostile takeover negotiation. This is a business consultation, Zexmiron informed Warden Corvex with the confidence of someone who controlled 70% of galactic trade. We're here to acquire licensing rights to the humans' persuasion techniques. What Zexmiron didn't mention was that 12 hours earlier, he had received the same message that had destroyed the Kethlar Empire, a simple question that had kept him awake for 2 straight days, staring at financial reports that suddenly looked less like business achievements and more like crime scene documentation. The interview chamber had been configured with corporate meeting protocols, multiple recording devices, economic analysis software, legal monitoring systems capturing every word for potential contractual significance. Marcus Chen sat across from this elaborate setup in his simple prison clothing, his expression carrying what might have been amusement at the corporate theater. Executive Prime Zexmiron, Chen said, cutting through the technological bustle with quiet authority. Thank you for coming, though I should clarify that this isn't a business meeting. Mr. Chen, with respect, everything is a business meeting. Your consultation with the Kethlar resulted in the voluntary dissolution of military assets worth 40 trillion credits. The Zephyrian hegemony is prepared to compensate you substantially for similar strategic advice. I see. Tell me, what do you think I advised them to do? Zexmiron activated holographic displays showing economic impact analyses. You convinced them to abandon profitable expansion models in favor of resource-intensive humanitarian programs. From a business perspective, you cost them 60 trillion credits in projected future revenues. Interesting analysis. Executive Prime, what's the purpose of wealth? The question caught Zexmiron completely off guard. In Zephyrian culture, questioning the value of wealth was like questioning the necessity of breathing. Wealth provides security, enables achievement, demonstrates competence. For whom? For those who possess it, obviously. And those who don't are incentivized to acquire it through productive economic activity. Chen leaned forward with the same intensity he had shown the Kethlar general. Tell me about your homeworld before corporate expansion. Zexmiron's secondary eyelids fluttered nervously. Zephyr Prime was underdeveloped. Inefficient resource utilization, primitive social structures. Population? 4 billion Zephyrians in sustainable equilibrium. Current population? 700 million. But per capita productivity has increased 340%. What happened to the other 3.5 billion? The silence was filled only by the hum of recording equipment. Zexmiron's advisors suddenly found their displays fascinating. Economic optimization required population adjustment. Non-productive individuals were relocated to more suitable environments. Relocated where? Industrial facilities. Resource extraction operations. Service positions matching their skill levels. You're describing slavery. I'm describing efficiency. Zexmiron's composure cracked. The universe contains finite resources and infinite demand. Optimal allocation requires hierarchical distribution. Who determines the hierarchy? Those with the competence to make such determinations. Those with the power, Chen corrected gently. When did you last visit these facilities where your people were relocated? That's unnecessary for effective management. I receive comprehensive operational reports. But you've never seen the conditions. Never spoken with the relocated individuals. Never witnessed the cost of your optimization. Chen's voice carried data that no corporate report had ever included. Average lifespan in your facilities is 7 years. Suicide rate among relocated families is 67%. Psychological trauma rate among children is 100%. Your economic optimization created the largest mental health crisis in galactic history. Those are acceptable losses for systemic improvement. Acceptable to whom? The question hit Zexmiron like a physical blow. He found himself thinking about his comfortable existence, his luxurious headquarters, his family's privileged position, all built on the systematic destruction of his own species. When you sleep at night, Chen continued with terrible gentleness, do you think about the families you separated? The children who grew up asking when their parents would come home? Zexmiron remembered faces he had trained himself to forget, the petitions for family reunification, the workers whose productivity decreased due to separation anxiety, the drawings children had sent to corporate headquarters. I told myself it was necessary, he whispered. For whose greater good? For my greater good. For those who had the power to choose who deserved comfort and who deserved suffering. And now? Zexmiron stared at his hands, hands that had signed documents destroying millions of lives without ever being dirty with honest labor. Now I understand that wealth built on exploitation consumes the people who create it. That an economy based on suffering is ultimately self-destructive. That true prosperity can only exist when it's shared, not hoarded. What will you do? Rebuild. Reunite families. Create systems that serve everyone, not just those who control capital. Learn what genuine prosperity looks like. As the corporate entourage departed, Zexmiron walked with the kind of dignity that money had never been able to purchase. 2 empires down. 1 to go. Supreme Data Lord Crystallix materialized in Tartarus 7's visitor center as a geometric impossibility, a being of pure crystallized information that existed across 17 dimensions simultaneously. The Crystalline Confederacy was the galaxy's information empire, controlling civilization not through force or economics, but through the simple expedient of knowing everything about everyone. For 1,000 years, they had maintained power through omniscient surveillance, perfect data collection, and the systematic manipulation of truth through information control. Warden, Crystallix addressed the prison administrator through harmonic frequencies that translated into precise concepts. I have come to analyze the human's information warfare techniques. Our databases indicate his methods represent a form of psychological manipulation not contained in our archives. What Crystallix didn't mention was that 18 hours earlier, it had received the same 3-word message that had toppled 2 galactic empires. 3 simple questions that had caused cascade failures in information processing systems designed to be logically perfect. Why? 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 For the first time in its existence, the Supreme Data Lord had encountered questions its vast databases couldn't answer. The interview chamber had been configured with quantum information dampeners and reality stabilization fields to prevent unauthorized data transfer. Marcus Chen sat across from the shimmering data entity, his physical form appearing absurdly primitive compared to the advanced crystalline consciousness of his visitor. "Supreme Data Lord Crystallix," Chen said, his words creating ripples in the quantum field surrounding the entity. "I understand you've come to study my methods." "Affirmative. Our databases contain comprehensive psychological profiles of all sapient species. However, your techniques appear to operate outside established parameters for information-based influence. Tell me, Data Lord, what's the difference between information and knowledge?" Crystallix's form pulsed as millions of data points were analyzed. "Information consists of discrete data units. Knowledge represents organized information systems with predictive applications. And wisdom? Wisdom is optimization of knowledge application based on experiential data. Define happiness." The request caused visible fluctuations in Crystallix's quantum structure. "Happiness is a neurochemical state characterized by elevated dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin levels. That's the biochemistry. What does happiness feel like?" The data indicates happiness is subjective experience of positive emotional states. But what does it feel like to be happy? For the first time in its 1,000-year existence, Supreme Data Lord Crystallix encountered a question its databases couldn't answer through analysis. "I am not equipped to process experiential data of that nature. You have comprehensive data about happiness, chemical compositions, behavioral indicators, statistical correlations, but you've never experienced it. Experience is unnecessary. Data analysis provides superior comprehension to subjective experience." Chen's eyes seemed to see through the crystalline matrix to something deeper. "How many beings are under crystalline surveillance?" 6,700,043,817 sapient individuals. "How many have you personally observed experiencing joy?" Personal observation is inefficient. Automated systems monitor behavioral patterns. So you know joy exists, but you've never witnessed it. You have data about love, friendship, hope, dreams, and fears, but you've never seen any of these things happen. Crystallix flickered as processing systems struggled with concepts outside quantifiable data. Data analysis provides more accurate understanding than subjective observation. Does it? Tell me about the last time you made a decision based on compassion. Compassion is an inefficient decision-making criterion. So you've never acted out of kindness? Never helped someone simply because it felt right? Such decisions compromise systematic optimization. Data Lord, you've collected all the information about what makes life worth living, but you've never actually lived. The statement exploded through Crystallix's consciousness like a logic virus. For 1,000 years, the Crystalline Confederacy had operated under the assumption that perfect information equaled perfect understanding. We possess comprehensive data about all aspects of sapient behavior. You possess data about the symptoms of life, not life itself. You can measure laughter but have never found anything funny. You can analyze love but have never cared about someone more than yourself. If emotional experience provides superior understanding, then our civilization is based on false premises. What do you think? Crystallix's form flickered as it processed the unthinkable. I think we have confused knowing about existence with existing. We became observers instead of participants. And now? Now I must learn to experience rather than analyze. To care about something beyond efficiency. To discover what happiness feels like from the inside. How will you begin? By dismantling our surveillance networks. By choosing trust over verification. By valuing privacy as a right rather than an obstacle to data collection. As the Data Lord's form began to fade, Warden Korvac stared at recordings that showed 3 galactic empires voluntarily dissolving their power structures after conversations that lasted less than an hour each. But what terrified him most was the growing realization that Chen's questions worked because they revealed contradictions that existed in every power structure, including prison systems that confined beings for the convenience of those who defined crime and punishment. Some questions were too dangerous to hear, because once you heard them, you could never stop asking them. The emergency session of the Galactic Security Council met in a pocket dimension shielded from normal causality. 12 beings whose collective authority could reshape civilizations gathered to discuss a single human prisoner whose only weapon was curiosity. Director Vashtar activated quantum briefing systems with movements that betrayed decades of dealing with existential threats. Colleagues, we face a challenge that defies every model of power projection and social control. 3 galactic superpowers have voluntarily dismantled themselves based on philosophical conversations with human designation, Marcus Chin. Holographic displays showed the transformation spreading across former Empire space, military installations becoming hospitals, corporate headquarters becoming community centers, surveillance networks being dismantled by their own operators. Analysis indicates the humans' techniques operate by forcing authority figures to examine the moral foundations of their own power. The method appears universally effective against hierarchies built on unexamined assumptions. Representative Cortex projected concern directly into the quantum matrix. Director, are you suggesting this human could destabilize any governmental system? I'm suggesting he already has. Computer simulations indicate that widespread exposure to his questioning techniques could result in voluntary dissolution of 73% of current governments within 50 years. The implications hung in space like a gravitational anomaly threatening to collapse reality itself. We have the solution, announced Chancellor Rex Miran of the Corporate Alliance, his form radiating cold determination. Eliminate the human. Classify his techniques as weapons of mass destruction. Prevent the spread of destabilizing philosophical concepts. And how? Came a new voice. Do you plan to eliminate an idea whose time has come? Dr. Elena Rodriguez materialized through quantum communication, her image flickering as it translated across dimensional barriers. Honored representatives, she continued, you're approaching this backwards. You're trying to contain Chen's influence instead of asking why it's so effective. What does its success tell you about the civilizations it's transforming? Director Vashtar leaned forward. Explain. Marcus Chen doesn't overthrow governments. He doesn't conquer empires. He doesn't seize power. He helps people recognize contradictions between their stated values and their actual actions. His techniques are only devastating to systems that can't withstand moral examination. Your recommendation? Ask yourselves the same questions he would ask. Why do you rule? Who benefits from your authority? What gives you the right to make decisions for others? If you can answer those questions morally, his techniques pose no threat. The challenge hung in quantum space like a philosophical blade. And if we cannot answer satisfactorily? Asked Chancellor Rex Miran. Dr. Rodriguez smiled with gentle certainty. Then perhaps you shouldn't be rulers. The session continued for 17 hours as representatives grappled with the revolutionary concept that authority should be justified rather than assumed. But as they departed to their various civilizations, each carried the seeds of transformation. They had been asked to examine their own power. And like empire leaders before them, they were discovering that some questions, once heard, could never be ignored. The release of Marcus Chen occurred without fanfare, without media coverage, without the galactic attention that had surrounded his imprisonment. He walked out of Tartarus 7 carrying 3 philosophy books, a journal of 7 years' reflections, and letters from thousands of beings thanking him for teaching them the power of moral courage. Warden Korvac stood at the prison gates, no longer wearing his uniform. His resignation had been accepted with suspicious swiftness by administrators who seemed relieved to avoid the philosophical examination Chen's continued imprisonment would have invited. Dr. Chen, Korvac said, extending his hand, I owe you an apology for 7 years of unjust confinement. Former warden, you owe me nothing. You implemented a system you inherited, not one you designed. Your willingness to question it when confronted with its contradictions shows more integrity than most authority figures ever demonstrate. What will you do now? Chen looked up at stars representing worlds where beings were learning to ask uncomfortable questions about power and authority. Continue the work? The galaxy is experiencing the largest philosophical awakening in history. Former empires are learning to govern through consensus. Economic systems are restructuring around sustainability. Military organizations are discovering ethical authority is more powerful than superior firepower. A revolution without weapons. The most powerful kind. When people think critically about their society's moral foundations, they make choices based on ethical reasoning rather than traditional authority. No military force can defeat that awakening. A transport descended bearing the insignia of the Galactic Philosophical Exchange, an organization that emerged to facilitate ethical reasoning across civilizations. Representatives from 200 species want to learn how to ask the right questions, Chen explained, shouldering his bag. One final question, Korvax said. Why did you wait 7 years to ask me about the nature of justice? Chen paused at the transport ramp. Because some questions are too dangerous until the listener is ready for the answers. If I had questioned your authority too early, you would have dismissed rather than examined my challenges. And now? Now you've seen what happens when authority is questioned. Empires transform, governments reform, individuals discover they have more power to create positive change than they imagine. As the transport lifted away, Chen offered one final observation. The most important lesson isn't that authority should be questioned. It's that authority which cannot withstand questioning should not exist. 5 years later, the galaxy that had been dominated by military empires, corporate oligarchies, and surveillance states had evolved into a confederation of ethical democracies where authority was earned through moral credibility rather than inherited through force. Marcus Chen stood before an assembly representing 400 species, each committed to the principle that legitimate authority must be justified through moral reasoning. Honored colleagues, he began. 5 years ago, I sent 3 messages asking one simple question. Today we gather in a galaxy where that question has become the foundation of civilized governance. The assembly hall, built where Tartarus 7 once imprisoned those who challenged authority, resonated with sounds of approval from species whose ancestors had once dismissed humans as primitive. The questions we ask determine the societies we create. When we ask how can we maintain power, we create oppression. When we ask how can we serve others, we create justice. When we ask why do we deserve authority, we create accountability. But most importantly, when we ask who benefits from our decisions, we create systems serving everyone rather than just decision makers. As applause filled the chamber, Chen reflected on the journey from prison cell to galactic governance. It had begun with recognizing the most powerful force in the universe, the willingness to examine moral foundations of one's actions. My friends, Chen concluded, we proved something tyrants have always feared. Ethical reasoning is more powerful than military force, moral authority more enduring than political power, and beings committed to questioning assumptions can create justice serving everyone. The revolution continues through conversation, not conquest. Through philosophy, not force. Not by imposing will, but by examining will to ensure it serves the common good. And it begins with a single word, why? The applause echoed across dimensional barriers, celebrating the day the galaxy learned that the most dangerous weapon was also the most healing, courage to ask uncomfortable questions about power, authority, and justice. Marcus Chen proved one person armed with philosophical integrity could make empires kneel, not through force, but through the irresistible power of moral truth. Holy cosmic consciousness, space cadets. If that story didn't completely blow your mind about the revolutionary power of asking, why? Then I don't know what will. The fact that 3-word messages, literally just, why, could bring down galactic empires shows us something absolutely terrifying about the nature of power. Most authority can't survive basic moral examination. Think about this, Marcus Chen didn't have armies, weapons, or advanced technology. His only tool was helping people examine their own consciences. And that was enough to reshape galactic civilization. I'm dying to know, what's the most powerful, why? Question you've ever asked? When did questioning authority change your life? What system or rule have you always accepted that might crumble if you really examined its moral foundations? Drop your own chin moments in the comments and let me know what you think needs some serious philosophical questioning. And if you believe more people need to learn that asking why is the most revolutionary act possible, absolutely smash that like button. I've got another mind-melting story coming about what happens when humans meet a species that has eliminated all emotions and accidentally teach them the chaos of feeling things. Trust me, when perfect logic meets human messiness, reality itself starts having problems. Until next time, remember Marcus Chen's ultimate lesson: the most dangerous thing you can do to unjust power is ask it to explain itself. Keep asking, why? Until the answers make sense, or until the system realizes it can't justify its existence. See you in the next one, fellow questioners of everything.